Since the 4th century BCE, storytellers have grappled with the question of what drives a good story. Is it a good plot or is it good characters? Here I want to take a look at Angela Carter's story, The Lady of the House of Love, to kind of think about plot and characters here, that how Carter takes two great characters and puts them into a collision, and how plot comes out of that collision. Here, the story itself, included within The Bloody Chamber, is a kind of an inverted Sleeping Beauty story. It is a fairy tale, right? It opens at last, the sort of echoes kind of that sense of once upon a time, and so you have two great kind of classical archetypes here, right? You've got the hero, and you have a kind of strange and wondrous Sleeping Beauty who is a vampire within the tale. So you have two very kind of fairy tale horror story types that are in collision here. The two characters, as Carter tells the story, are also representations of two Europes. She, as the Sleeping Beauty, as the vampire, the daughter of vampires, kind of represents the past, a sense of incest and decay that is rooted in Europe's history. He, the hero, represents modernity, and in all kinds of ways, as we'll see. So you have this collision of two times in Europe, as well as two characters. The thing that's between them is blood. In whose blood will be spilled, and what will the result of that blood spilling be? That's kind of the central tension that's present within the story. One other aspect that Carter uses in the storytelling we should note is her third-person point of view. She moves back and forth between the two characters' perspectives, which is that advantage of using a third-person perspective here. You can go into both characters' heads and kind of see the world through their eyes. And so it moves back and forth between what's known and unknown to each character as the world kind of unravels between them. Let's look at the two characters first. The first is the beautiful Queen of Vampires that Carter would reprise in her BBC radio play Vampirella, which is available under Pages if you'd like to listen to it. As a vampire, she is defined by her ghastly hunger. So you have a character here who has a clear want in the world, which is her hunger for blood. She is also defined by her past, a past that's marked by too many shadows. Her demented and atrocious ancestors kind of haunt her. And even though she is hungry for blood, she also, kind of hungers to be out of that, to be taken out of that cycle as well. That recurring cycle of hunger, desire, coupled with the act of meeting that hunger through blood. In her dream, she would like to be human, Carter writes. And so when the young soldier appears on her doorstep, she thinks to herself, I have always been ready for you. So this moment of the hero's appearance is kind of a culmination of her want to be outside of this recurring cycle of hunger and its satiation. As Carter tells this character, she kind of ranges through a number of female types, and you can note these as you read the story. The different kind of types or versions of the female that appear within this character's world and consciousness. Carter first notes that in her perennial sadness, she's of a girl who is both death and the maiden, right? That she, represents this kind of innocence and this sense of corruption, all in the same person. Her claws and teeth have been sharpened on centuries of corpses. So she has this kind of innocence to her that's there, but she also is marked by the blood of the corpses that she's piled up through time. She is a marker of decay, in Carter's telling. She is the mistress of all this disintegration. So the decay that is present within the castle and the land kind of takes its source in her. But in her desire, as she's grown, she is now a woman and must have men. So there's kind of clear sense of awakening that though she has this innocence that's complicated, that she has a growing sense of desire, and part of that growing sense of desire is to escape, the continual cycle of desire for blood and meeting that desire that she wants to become human, and then how she's seen. Is seen through a range of types. Like she appears sometimes like a shipwrecked bride. Sometimes she has the horror's fleshy mouth. Sometimes she is the crone, the hapless victim of inbreeding. She goes through this kind of wide range of female types in Carter's telling. She's a very complicated figure, and as she's defined within the storytelling. Now compare this to kind of the simplicity of the hero in the story, the young officer in the British Army who arrives on her doorstep one day on his bicycle. Whereas she is defined by all this complication, the hero in the story is defined by virginity, ignorance, potentia, and unknowingness, right? That he comes into the story not complicated, but as kind of a powerful force of innocence who meets up with this, more complicated, decaying figure in the vampire. Though he feels unease, he cannot feel terror because he is innocent, right? He doesn't know how to feel terror as he approaches her, and as he approaches her bed, as he's seduced by her, he does not feel terror. You can think about all the different aspects that define his modernity here. That he is a hero who is fully defined within his generation, this World War I generation in which Carter puts him. One thing that defines him is his bicycle. She describes it as his beautiful two-wheeled symbol of rationality. So he's a hero of innocence. He's a hero of modern times. He's a hero of change, and what will happen when he, meets up with this other, older, decayed world. As Carter writes on page 122, this being rooted in change in time, the hero is about to collide with the timeless Gothic eternity of the vampires, and it's this collision that defines the plot of this story. His innocence is also a part of him that makes him unafraid of challenge. This lack of imagination gives his heroism to the hero. She writes on page 131, he will learn to shudder in the trenches. And so this kind of like robust sense of vigor, this robust sense of unknowing heroism that defines the World War I generation, kind of marching off to war, not realizing its horrors and its consequences. He's certainly a part of that, right? That he will come to understand. He will come to lose his innocence in the trenches. He will come to feel horror there. But as of now, he's incapable of it. In fact, when he meets the vampire, he feels like he can cure her through the tools of psychoanalysis. As Carter notes on 134, he thinks, we shall take her to Zurich, where he shall cure her of all these nightmares. He decided to try and resurrect the rose. So even when the vampire has become human and died, he takes the flower from her and believes that he can resurrect her through that. That through psychoanalysis he can kind of shake out all those complex effects of decay and consequence of decay that defines the vampire here. So I see this is like a Sleeping Beauty story in Carter's telling, right? That there's this meeting of a sleeping beauty and a hero, a prince of sorts. When Carter tells it on page 129 of 130, you get a further sense of the complex collision that occurs here. She is like a doll, Carter writes, powered by some slow energy of which she was not in control, in his eyes. It deeply moved his heart. She said, "I've always been ready for you." She is a haunted house. Her ancestors sometimes come and peer out of the windows of her eyes, and that is very frightening. One of the things in terms of the plot that's interesting here is, who changes the other, and how is that one changed, right? There's a sense in which she seduces him and has power over him, but he has impact on her. He has power over her. And in what ways do they know and understand their agency? In what ways do they know and understand their powers in this story? In some ways, it feels like they don't understand their full power. In some ways, it feels like they don't understand the effect that they're having upon the other character. And in Carter's telling, this kind of creates this kind of curious inverted effect to the story, right? Where innocence becomes experience, where experience is kind of turned back to innocence. It happens within the space of seduction in this story, the inverted marriage bed, right? Where typically it's the virginal bride who bleeds, when being penetrated sexually. Here it's the bridegroom who bleeds on the marriage bed, right? When the vampire seduces him, he bleeds. But in Carter's telling, that blood comes not from him in the end, but from her. As she writes on 133, "A spasm you will mistake for that of love and not of death," right? That you take the sexual act and you see it as love, but in actuality in this story it's a kind of an initiation of death. It's that complex mixing of sexuality and death, the human need to procreate against the fear of death. She has fumbled the ritual, the vampire. She kneels among the broken glass of her glasses when she drops them. She has never seen her own blood before, not her own blood. It exercises upon her an odd fascination. In himself, by his presence, the handsome bicyclist is an exorcism. He pulls her out of her existence as a vampire and makes her human. He puts his mouth to the wound as she bleeds. So you get this, inversion of the vampire, the vampire story. It's right. It's not the vampire who takes the blood from the human, but the human who puts his mouth to the wound of the vampire. Her painted ancestors turn away their eyes and grind their fangs. How can she bear the pain of becoming human? She seeks to escape this, this complex want of vampirism that she feels. She is the sleeping beauty who, sleeping in her decay, sleeping in her desire for blood, sleeping in that space. And he is the one, the hero, the prince who awakens her. And where does this lead in terms of the resolution of the story? She becomes human and dies. She is not sleeping, Carter writes on 135. In death, she looked far older. So the hero recognizes this. He recognizes her death, and seeks. He takes the flower, which he puts out in his barracks, and then it blooms and scents the whole barracks. So you have this, like, the flower is the, kind of offers a sense of the love between them, but also that represents the sense of her death as well, which stinks up the barracks at the end of the story. And the story ends with the sentence, "The next day his regiment embarked for France." So you have, like, the sexual act that initiates him in his journey into war, into the trenches, into a world of death in the end. It's a really complex and inverted tale that Carter tells here as she plays around with that sense of the Sleeping Beauty and the hero